For centuries past, invaders have swept across Northumberland, and among the conquering Romans and the savage Vikings. The fury and vitality of their invasions has made an indelible impact on early English history. But today it is the more peaceful-minded tourists who arrive, either to suntan themselves on the beaches or look around. So in 1969 we spent a week in this county, and at Tynemouth we looked first at the Priory. For over 1300 years religious buildings have stood here, gutted and destroyed on the orders of Henry VIII. The Priory now stands as a silent and gaunt symbol to a once powerful sacred order. Kings of Scotland are known to have been buried here, and lesser mortals took sanctuary there from neighbouring enemies. But even the tombstones of dead Victorians have that forlorn and forgotten look about them. A few miles west of the Priory began, or ended, the Roman Wall. We had previously read of the 73.5 miles of Roman military engineering skill built nearly 2,000 years ago, and the road you see here, which took us to Still Rig, 35 miles away, is actually built on rock pulled down from it. Still Rig was where we began walking on the wall itself. This was after a steep climb to the top of a hill. After reaching the top, Louis refused to go any further, but some of us walked to the nearest mile castle, number 38. And the view to Crag Lough and beyond speaks for itself, with the wall still topping the various crags. Our next tour was to Cholerford to see the museum at Chester's. Here, by the North Tyne, and beyond the floodwater level, the Romans built a fine bathhouse. It has been very well excavated, and we easily found our way around. We wondered at the split personality of these people, obsession with cleanliness on one hand, and barbaric cruelty and vice on the other. "20 miles north of the wall, on the way to Scotland, is High Rochester, a Roman fort built in AD 80. its importance increased when the Antonine Wall in Scotland was abandoned. Bremenion, as the Romans called it, boasted massive walls on which catapults were mounted, and where 500 men were billeted. We wondered how they must have missed sunny Italy on a similar day to the one when we looked around. It was just that little bit chilly. 30 miles northeast of Rochester is Holy Island, and we passed fields like these to get there. This was the most northerly point of our holiday, but we had little time to spend there. This was because a swiftly moving tide can trap anything that moves on this causeway for several hours if the tidal warning is ignored. Originally known as Lindisfarne, this island is known as the cradle of English Christianity, and the priory was first sacked by the Vikings in AD 793. Because of its association with many early English bishops, the island was renamed Holy Island in the 11th century and its priory rebuilt. But today, that too is reminiscent of Tynemouth, but it does attract those interested in ecclesiastical history. Not mentioned in the guidebooks were these upturned boats, presumably used as stores by local fishermen. 5 miles south of Holy Island is Bamborough, dominated by the huge red sandstone castle. In this monument is contained all the violence of Northumberland's history, from William the Conqueror to the English Civil War and the Jacobite Rebellion of 1715. The coast attracts everyone, not least the fishermen, from the singular to the plural. We had stopped for a meal at sea houses and took the opportunity of seeing the local fishers disposing of their catch. Also on the coast is Dunstanburgh Castle. There is no motor road to Dunstanburgh, so we had to walk over a mile along the coast road to reach it. Guidebooks had already told us, when the building began in the 14th century, that its military style was already out of date, like building the Maginot Line in the nuclear missile age, which probably accounted for the fact that although the largest castle in Northumberland, it boasted 11 acres, it played the smallest role in its history, and by the end of the Wars of the Roses it had become a battered ruin. Former petrels on the promontory made hideous screeching noises. And while Louis rested her feet to watch them, Jeff and I went off to see the remains of Queen Margaret's Tower. But soon it was time to leave, and we came away with the feeling that the old castle was set in one of the most pleasant spots in all Northumberland. No doubt the prisoner here thought otherwise. We broke our journey at Druridge Bay. The first week in August, and nobody else here. It seemed incredible. The southern tourists thought the water too cold. But this did not deter the hardy northern children from really getting their feet wet. We crossed this 12th century bridge into Warkworth, whose pride and joy is the castle. It had more to show than Dunstanburgh, being the ancestral home of the Percys of Northumberland. This part of the fortifications is known as the Mayor's Tower. The massive keep figured prominently in Shakespeare's Henry IV. But while it is empty and ghost-like now, the views themselves are worth the climb up the many stairs. The Lion Tower, the shields of the Percys, are all that remains of the great hall and other apartments, now letting themselves into the sky. And so we said goodbye to some of the castles of Northumberland, and spent our last day resting on the beach of Whitley Bay. Jeff and I puffingly climbed the 134 steps to the top of the lighthouse, and from there looked towards northwest, which was to be our holiday for the second week. We spent the second week on a caravan on a farm in pleasant North Lancashire countryside. And where every morning we were woken up by the cows leaving the milking sheds for the fields, something we hadn't bargained for, but which we finally got used to. We hadn't been as close to the country before, but by the time the week was out, we knew the cows were British Friesians, and had seen the birth of several calves. Whittington Parish Church was modernised with the usual Victorian thoroughness, and only the tower can now claim to be called Norman. The church overlooks the village, which is just a mile or so from the Yorkshire and Westmoreland borders, and suitable as a touring centre. It has just one main street through which most cars pass without stopping, but it boasts a pub in which we enjoyed ourselves most and were made to feel at home by mine host. Harrison's farm is at the end or the beginning of the village street, though not so old as some of the houses along it. So for the time we were there, we had the unusual pleasure of having fresh eggs, butter and milk whenever we wanted them. Not rain, but Pecker Twin Falls at Ingleton, Yorkshire, just 9 miles away. We saw these after a 2-mile walk through wooded glens. But the locals told us that the river level was much diminished due to the dry summer. And certainly the River Lune showed obvious signs of the dry spell. But at Morecambe we finally had some rain, so it was there that we went aboard Moby Dick, built for a long-forgotten Gregory Peck film. We wanted Alison to walk the plank, but she wanted to do something else, and as usual she got her way. Morecambe was getting ready for the big light switch on, and by the afternoon it was packed with incoming sightseers. Seaside resorts certainly don't look their best with the absence of sun and warm weather, and Morecambe was no exception. But it was pleasant enough for a day's trip. It was just under an hour away from Whittington. The Lake District was our last tour. We had decided to go to Wastwater, the least known and visited of all the lakes, but could not resist stopping to watch scenes like these. To get to Wastwater from Ambleside, you have to travel over the notorious Hard Knot Pass, at times nearly 1,300 feet above sea level, with its steep gradients of 1 in 3, tortuous zigzag turns, and room for one car only. But after a hair-raising ride, we finally reached Wasdale Head. The guidebooks had already told us how long the lake was, 3 miles, how wide, half a mile, and how deep, 260 feet, as well as the names of the 2 high fells, Yew Barrow and Great Gable. But quite a surprise was to see the mountain climbers opposite, dangling like so many puppets on a string. Naturally, the children used up their excess energies the usual way whenever there are stones and water to be found. And so we left the lakes and came to the end of our 1969 holiday, with great feelings of regret. And on the following day we left the north, not before we had said goodbye to our good friends, who had helped to make the holiday the pleasure it was, and then we departed for the south, to home, 200 odd miles away.